Welcome to Unleashed, the podcast where we redefine leadership by focusing on what truly matters, the people driving change. Change leadership is about guiding people through transformation in a way that inspires them to embrace change because they believe in it. Whether you're a leader looking to foster a culture of growth or someone eager to break through barriers in life and business, this podcast is for you. Now our host, Wendi.
Welcome to Unleashed Podcast, where we explore the leadership blueprint. I'm your host, Wendi. In this episode, we welcome Ruth Rathblott, a TEDx speaker, best-selling author, and expert on inclusion and belonging. She shares her powerful journey of embracing uniqueness and how the act of unhiding unlocks potential and fosters deep connections. Join us as we explore how authenticity can transform workplace culture and create environments where everyone feels valued. Ruth, super excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
So excited to be here, Wendi, and to dig into Unleashed.
Yeah, let's do it. So Ruth actually was a referral from Wendi Koch, who is a previous guest on Unleashed, and great podcast. So if y'all haven't tuned into that one, listen to that one. I'm curious, Ruth. So both of you did TEDx. What's your passion around doing TEDx talks?
Sure. I think for me, the TEDx was always on my bucket list. It was one of those things. I'd watched so many of them. I had seen people kind of share their message, their idea worth spreading. And I thought about my own idea worth spreading with this kind of concept of having and feeling like the need to hide part of ourselves, Wendi, and how do we unleash that so that we can be free?
Yeah.
And so TEDx was absolutely on my bucket list. It was something that I knew I wanted to do. I kind of thought, though, that it would be the stop point. Like, oh, I say it and that's it. Like, it's over. But that is not what happened at all.
Oh, well, I can't wait to dig into that story, which we'll do in just a moment. You also have written a couple of books. So tell us about your books.
Yes. And Wendi Koch and I actually wrote our first book at the same time. That's how I met her. And it's funny, after the TEDx talk, it was almost like the TEDx was this trailer or teaser of my full story. It gave you 13 minutes of this journey of hiding and learning to unhide, which is part of my story. And what I realized is, and I had a lot of questions from people who watched this TEDx. What else happened during that? What's more? Tell us more. Tell us more of the stories behind the hiding and behind how did you learn to hide? What is hiding? What did it look like for you? And then how did you finally learn to unhide? Like unpack that for us and tell us what that looked like and why was it so freeing? And so that second book came out of the TEDx. And then the second book came out of the first book, which was, okay, here's my journey. This Singlehandedly, my first book. That's the idea of learning to unhide and embrace connection. And then the second book, Unhide and Seek, learning to live your best life and do your best work, came out of the idea of, okay, so what about you now? Like I turn the tables to you to think about what is it that you're hiding? What type of hider are you? And what are the steps to unhide so that you can start to create that space for yourself and for others in your organizations or in your life, because most of us are hiding something.
Yeah. So Ruth, I'm just really conscious of my thoughts right now and my body right now. And when you start to even talk about this unhiding, I almost have this physical, like, what is that? What does that look like? Or am I hiding? Like almost a fear. Do you find that that's oftentimes how people respond?
Yes, because I think it's tuning into the hiding part, because the hiding is, there's a couple of things to say about that. The hiding is, it comes from a fear of rejection or a fear of judgment. And recently I even had a friend say, my hiding came from a fear of pity, feeling like I told somebody my secret. If I told them about something that happened to me, they would judge me. They would reject me. They would pity me. They would think I didn't measure up. And what's amazing, Wendi, is often when we're hiding, we think we're the only ones that are hiding. And when you say that part about that fear, that anxiety that comes up, right, to unhide, it's because of thinking about, I think I'm the only one that's hiding something. And second is if I share that part, it's almost like, when you go to the doctor's office and they tell you to take a big, deep breath in, and then you have to hold it and it feels really uncomfortable. And then you get to exhale it. That's
Mm.
what unhiding really can feel like. But that moment before you exhale, you think you're never going to breathe again, right? Like, what's it going to feel like? Am I going to be able to do it? Yeah, we all know we can breathe. And so that's what I think about with hiding and unhiding is
Mm.
it does it. It requires you and it invites you to be curious about yourself and to think about those spaces where you have felt like you held yourself back, where you
Yeah.
didn't raise your hand in a meeting because even though you had a great idea or had a question that maybe others wanted to know,
Hmm.
looking back parts of yourself that you're dealing with currently or past trauma, people, Wendi, even hide their dreams and aspirations and their goals. And that's
Really?
Oh, yeah. Because we're so afraid of that. I don't know about you, but I remember telling somebody when I was starting this journey of speaking and writing a book, and somebody rolled their eyes when I shared this dream I had.
What?
And I called them out. I said, "You just rolled your eyes." But that's the what we're so afraid of, right? Is if we tell someone our dreams or our hopes or something,
Mm.
people will say, "Oh, well, you can't do that," or "You're not smart enough to do that," or "Wow, everybody does that. How are you going to be so different?" And so we're afraid of that judgment and that rejection rather
Wow.
than asking for the support.
That is so funny. And I don't mean funny, haha. I mean funny, ironic, because, I'm having this flashback of when I do consulting projects, one of the things that I have managers do is I have them present their results in front of the group. They go back and implement, and then they come back and they present their results. And I had a person one time, like, public speaking is the number one fear in the world, not
Above
just in
that.
the US. And you dig down to that, and it really is the fear of rejection. Like
Yeah.
they think they're going to die. And the reality of that, the logic of that is if I'm rejected, what's going to happen? I'm rejected. It's not going to kill me. And I think that fear is just, I'm hearing that same thing and hiding. So, man, do I want to just unpack your story and really understand how this became not just your passion, it became your day in the life of Ruth. So let's start with your TEDx talk. So um, the title of your TEDx is When I Stopped Hiding, I Found Freedom. And I told you this before I hit record, and I'll let our listeners know. Listen to this TEDx. Ruth's story is so enlightening. It's powerful. I found myself just leaning in and what happened next and what did you do then? And I was asking questions that when it was over, I went, I want to listen again. So highly recommend tuning in and we'll make sure that that's in the show notes. So the question, I love how you begin your talk and you say, I'm a white female. You give your pronouns heterosexual, not who you would think of when you think of diversity. So, this is a powerful challenge to conventional ideas of diversity. So, what inspired you to start your TEDx with that statement?
This is deep. This is layered.
We're going to go there, Ruth.
So the first piece is absolutely what you're saying in terms of traditionally how we think about diversity is often around race, it's around gender, and it's around potentially sexual orientation people think of, right? When we mention the
Yep.
word diversity.
Yep.
We're in a time right now where even that has been challenged. And those are important work streams and thoughts and lenses of diversity. And yet, what I wasn't hearing in conversations was disability. Disability, both visible disabilities, non-apparent disabilities. I wasn't hearing age talked about. I wasn't hearing any differences of even where people live. I wasn't hearing a broader definition of diversity
Mm.
and even just difference. And I was in a leadership role and I was questioned about leadership and diversity. And I shared that to start my TEDx with because it's how people see us, right? It's that space of not only do we define diversity one way, but then
Mhm.
we make a lot of assumptions about people based on sometimes very little information, sometimes only on appearance information. And when I asked the question about when we were debating this topic, I asked, well, do you see me as diverse? And the answer back from some was, no, not really. Maybe you could check a box and say gender. And I said, oh, okay. What about my disability? And I was born for your listeners, your unleashed listeners, Wendi. I was born with a limb difference, meaning I was born missing part of my left hand. And for 25 years, I hid that part of myself.
For 25 years?
25 years, starting at the age of 13, I started hiding. And
Wow.
when I asked a question back to that same group, I said, what about my disability? The answer back was, oh, well, we don't even see you as disabled. Disability isn't really part of this conversation. And it really got me to thinking about, A, what does diversity mean? But also,
Mhm.
part of it also had me looking at myself saying, wait, I can't really be mad at them for not seeing me as disabled because I actually haven't talked about my disability. I haven't shared part of my journey. I
Or
haven't
how it
shared,
limits you or affects you or
or even, right, some of the small successes or things that I achieved that you've never thought about. How does she do that? I've made it easy because not talking about things sometimes we think we make other people feel comfortable when we don't talk about things, right? Oh, I'm not going to share my education past with you or my finances or because it's going to make you uncomfortable. I didn't share my disability because I had an unreliable narrator in my head telling me it was awful and disgusting and gross and that people would judge me and reject
Mm.
me. And then I also didn't want to make people feel uncomfortable with it. So I hid it. I hid both the actual thing, the physical thing, and I hid the journey with people. So how could I get mad with them when they said, "Oh, we don't even see you that way"? I hadn't shared it with them. And what I found is most of us walk around with that unreliable
Mhm.
narrator
That's
and
right.
those assumptions about people and ourselves. And we try to make people feel comfortable. We try to fit in to belong. And the truth is,
Mhm.
we make ourselves even more alienated when we do that.
Yeah. What have you found, Ruth, through your experience as you've helped people, number one, recognize that they're hiding? Because I think so often we don't even know that we're hiding. Number two, once they start to recognize that they're hiding, where do you go from that? How do you make it? First of all, I'm thinking through, Ruth, why is it our job to make people feel comfortable? You
Mm,
know? And so as part of this unhiding, I would think that we would have to confront that.
yeah. Yeah. And that's part of there's so many things that we need to unpack here because I
Right.
think definitely um, there's the first piece around starting with yourself, right? Thinking about when we talk about this idea, Wendi, what are you hiding? Like what's holding you back? What's holding you back from connecting with people? What's holding you back from belonging? It requires you to be curious about yourself. And that's sometimes uncomfortable, right? Because it's easier to kind of just go and deal with things and say, "Oh, that was the past," or nobody needs to know that. And yet, we don't often take space to be introspective or reflect on how is it holding us back. And
Mm,
in the second book on hide and seek, I break down four types of hiders. And it's what you've been acknowledging and talking about, which is there are people who, Wendi, when they're listening to your audience that's listening to this, knows exactly what I'm talking about in terms of hiding. Like they do it,
mhm,
they know, I don't have to explain it much more than
mhm.
they know what hiding is. The second type is somebody who's curious, who says, well, just like you said, what am I hiding? Like, and maybe gets that deep, deep feeling in their
Right.
chest of, wait, am I hiding anything? That's the second type. That's the person who's curious. The third type of hider is the person who will swear to you and has sworn, and you probably know them too, is an open book, right? They overshare, if anything. They think oh, I tell everybody everything. I'm not hiding anything. And then the fourth type is the person, and again, you may have met them. I have. I just met one on an elevator recently who said, I'm not even sure why this is important to talk about. Like, we really think people are hiding. And I call them the fortress, the person who is guarded, right?
Yeah.
And my belief is that just like anything, we have a preference for one. Because in terms of how it keeps us safe, even the open book and overshare feels like they need to do that to, feel like they put out every piece of information. And yet all four types are actually hiding. And the truth is, we are actually all four types, all four types. I
Mm,
mean, and there are situations where it benefits us to be a fortress of to guard information where it wouldn't be safe because unfortunately, even in 2025 and specifically in 2025, there are spaces where it doesn't feel safe to unhide, where it feels
mhm.
safer to hide part of yourself with reality. Um, and so as I think about this space, I think about doing the work on ourselves first, and then thinking about others in our circle who also may be hiding. And to your question about the idea of why should we have to do this? Like, why should we have to make people feel comfortable?
Yeah.
It's a really good one. And it delves into what we've been taught, right? From childhood, from media, from our families, from our cultures of what is acceptable and what is not. And we, our hiding is in reaction to that. Our hiding is in reaction to what we were taught as a child about messages of what it's meant to fit in adulthood, we get those messages from work, our workplaces and our organizations, right? What does it mean to be a good culture fit? What does it mean to
Mhm.
be a good leader? I don't know about you, Wendi, but I was taught that as a good leader, you keep people at arm's length. You
Mhm.
don't share challenges. You have to have all of the answers. That's a part of hiding and fitting in. Not being able to share when you don't know something or when you've had challenges around it as a leader, that's part of hiding. And it makes
Yeah.
it difficult sometimes for your team. So we get a lot of message and we get messages from media of what it means to be, what it means to fit in and what it means to hide.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful to, celebrities and social media, and maybe this is controversial, but celebrities and social media who are willing to
Yeah.
start to share parts of themselves so that we all, or potentially some of us, feel like we can unhide that part of ourselves too,
Yeah. Or in the
especially
case of
around.
the Grammys, maybe showing just a little too much. Maybe we need to hide a little. No.
Yeah, I think, well, there's
Is there a balance?
there's balance. There is definitely balance. And I guess even referring to just thinking about talking about mental health, something
Mm.
that before COVID,
Yeah.
many of us didn't even acknowledge in terms of our workspaces or our lives. And then when some of us were challenged with it, being able to tune in and have some empathy for others who may be going through this too.
Yeah. So, Ruth, I'm thinking about there must be different types of hiding. A physical disability, maybe a mental disability, I would think would be different in how we hide. Even just I'm thinking about the company that I worked for the majority of my career was a retail consulting company and was the vice president of training for them. And our culture was, you talk about hiding identity as well. And our culture was showtime.
Mm,
So I don't care if you're sick. I don't care if you are having a bad life. I don't care if dot dot dot. It's showtime because your clients don't care if you're having a bad life. They paid for a project. They paid for an outcome. They paid for a product or service. They want that. And so I got very, very good at I'll never forget, I was opening up a licensee in Argentina, and I was going to Argentina every 4 weeks for, I think it was 4 or 6 months. And I was pregnant, and I was sick, 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 sick. And I would speak until I couldn't speak anymore. I would run to the washroom and throw up and come back. They're probably still doing exercises that I had to just make up because I needed to go throw up. So
mm,
like the showtime mentality, I think my whole career I've taken pride in and probably even judged people who show up and go, "You know what? I don't feel very good today." And I want to go, "Buck it up." Right? They're
mhm.
being authentic, and so what does that look like? And is that culture changing in business today? What's your experience with that?
Yes. Again, so many things to unpack here with you and unleash.
That's the
I
goal.
I think the first piece of the question that you asked in terms of what does hiding actually look like, and how does it show up, right, in terms of
Hmm.
our daily life, or and then the piece that you talked around the overachieving and overcompensating when you do feel like the need to hide, but you still have to go on and it's showtime, that piece of it.
Yeah.
And even the tolls that it takes on us, the cost of hiding, because I think
Hmm.
that's real, and where we are right now. I think the first piece to your question, I think about hiding in three buckets. I think about people hiding their past. So I've had people share with me they hide their past traumas, things that happened to them in their life, that impact the way they connect with us, that impact that overcompensating or that overachieving because they don't want anyone to know about that thing of their past, right?
Hmm.
I've had people share things that they're hiding in their present, whether it's, I had just a few weeks ago someone share, I'm hiding from my manager that I am 5.5 months pregnant. And when I say that one, you're hiding it so you're not able to get the support that you need, right? To go to those
Yeah.
doctors or feel tired, et cetera. But you're also not setting up your manager to succeed either in terms of when you go out, because you are going to go out on leave at some point,
Hmm.
or even be taking care of somebody else, right? So how do that hiding doesn't help, right? It takes away from the culture of the organization. I've had
Hmm.
people, so when I say the present, people hide their health issues for sure. They hide their taking care of somebody else issues. I've had people share, I can't tell my manager that I'm taking care of an elderly parent. Um,
Really?
yeah. I had somebody just a few weeks ago share that they're hiding their cancer diagnosis. Like
That is so
people hide.
sad.
It is. And that's the thing. And I'll just say this, there's the present stuff that people hide, and then there's the future. And I know we talked a little bit about this before getting on today, people hiding their dreams and aspirations, so their future. So that hiding runs the spectrum. And absolutely what you just said, it is sad. And the reason it's sad is because of three things that I have found in my research and writing and speaking. It's exhausting. Hiding is
Yeah.
exhausting. It takes a toll on our physical health and our mental health. It's like having 47 tabs open on your computer, right?
Hmm.
It's exhausting. It's draining. So that's one piece of it. So it is sad because it doesn't have to feel like that. And yet, when we find ourselves in workplaces where the show must go on, it can feel like that, exhausting.
Hmm.
It's incredibly lonely because we often, again, think we're the only ones, but we do everything to fit in, and yet we still don't feel like we belong, that nobody sees us, right? Nobody hears us, nobody is there to support us. So it's
Mm.
lonely. And you can be in a crowded space. And I imagine you were when you were talking about being pregnant and then going to the bathroom. And you can be in this pregnant, like this beautiful, populated space, and then feel like you're alone, though, because you're holding on to your thing, right? And not sharing and not getting the support that you need. And
Mm.
the other piece, Wendy, is you miss out on opportunities when you hide. So by not sharing that part of yourself, you miss out on the support. You miss out on having someone maybe change the policy of what it means to be on maternity leave or pregnant in the workplace and helping others, right? And
Hmm.
getting those pieces done for the company. I think about, and not to only think about that example, but I think about the person who doesn't raise their hand in a meeting, right? Who
Mm.
has this great idea that the company loses out on because
Hmm.
they were afraid of that rejection and judgment.
Yeah.
Or the question that you think, well, I'm not going to ask it because I probably should know it, and I'll feel dumb if I ask it. I bet you more people in that room have that same question and are afraid to ask it, or have never thought about it that way. So we miss out.
Oh,
Those are missed
you're
opportunities.
you are so right. Every single time. And I encourage this in workshops and training and consulting projects. I say, please raise your hand for two reasons. Number one, your brain literally stops because it's trying to clear and understand. So by the time you actually check back in, I'm 5 slides ahead. And number two, every single time somebody asks the question, every time I get a group of people who are like, oh, thank God you asked that question because
Yeah.
it makes everybody better. And I think it's the same concept in hiding that I had never even thought about is when we choose to be transparent and vulnerable, guess what? Then everybody else starts to feel that they can be transparent and vulnerable and we make everybody better.
Right. Absolutely. And what I'll add on to that, Wendy, to what you're saying is sometimes when we don't ask that question or we don't raise our hand or we think, our education's not good enough or our accent's too heavy or we're female or we're male or whatever that thing is in our head that we're talking about, people make assumptions about us because of
Mm,
terms
isn't that
of,
true?
oh, well, she's not asking any questions. I guess she has no good ideas. Okay, well, actually,
Right.
no, I'm just afraid you're going to think I'm not smart or you're going to judge me on my accent or my stutter, etc. So people are making assumptions about us all the time with very little information because we haven't given them that information to be able to help fill in some of the gaps. We also then think about leaders who look at us saying, well, they never have any good ideas or nobody's following them. Like, so we create this whole system of how we want to be treated, yet we're not giving information, if that makes sense. Like we
Mm.
allow for the assumptions from people. And I guess to be really specific, I've had people come up to me after I speak and say, here's what I'm hiding. And we run through kind of the scenario play of, okay, here's how it's impacting you. Here's how it's impacting your team. And here's how it's impacting the culture and the leadership in your company. And here's how the company is missing out. And here's why you feel like you want to leave your company. Here's why you don't feel engaged with your coworkers. Here's why your company isn't getting your best creative and innovative ideas. So that's the layering of all of this.
Mm. So your journey and the catalyst to this, if I understood this correct in your TEDx, was an experience that you had working as an intern at a law firm
Mm.
and had an experience with someone who, you thought you were doing such a good job of hiding, right? And the judgment that came down, was that really, tell us that story and how did that transform into what you do today?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I started hiding when I was 13, when I was heading to a new high school on my first day. And somebody saw my hand and I thought, oh, you know what? I'm just going to tuck it into my pocket just for the bus ride. I had no idea that that single action of hiding part of myself would last for 25 years.
And you wore long sleeves for 25 years so that you could tuck your sleeve into your pocket.
And even if I wore a short sleeve, every outfit always had to have pockets. Like I really believed that hiding my hand would keep me safe. That was the goal, is keep me safe from judgment and rejection. I avoided even things that required two hands, like doing things with two hands. So yes, I ended up when I was 20 in an internship at a law firm. And I tell you, Wendy, on the side of it, I tried every time that I started something new, whether it was a new school, going off to college, going to this internship, going to new jobs. I tried to say, okay, now you're not going to hide. Nobody knows you here. Don't hide. Like show up with your hand. You're just show up.
Mm.
And I couldn't do it. I didn't know how to do it. And I just got easier and safer feeling in my head and in my body
Mhm.
to hide.
Because your brain literally goes, no, 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 no,
Yeah,
because you go into
totally.
fight or flight.
Fight or flight. The amygdala kicks in, like this is not safe. You're not going to be safe. And that unreliable narrator confirms it. Like, you know what? It's not going to be safe. People are going to think it's weird. People are going to stare. People are going to say things. They're not going to think you're capable. Just hide it. And make everyone else comfortable. So started at this internship. My job that summer was to put together various box top competitors for a laundry detergent box top. And while that probably doesn't sound sexy to you or to your listeners, because it isn't, I loved the project because it was mine. So I was like, I was a type A personality. I wanted to have my own project. I wanted the gold star at the end of the internship that I did.
Hmm.
And so I imagine that you might relate to this when the boss calls you into his office, it's exciting. Like none of the other interns were getting called into the senior partner's office. Like I was special, like I was getting this extra attention.
Hmm.
And I got to his office, and before I even really stepped foot in, he yelled, Ruth, did you ever go to kindergarten? And I took a moment And I couldn't remember my kindergarten teacher's name. I was in college, so mind you, I went to kindergarten at some point. He said, because if you had, you would have learned how to use scissors. And
Ruth.
yeah, I know it wasn't good. And it was definitely because what I was trying to do, Wendy, I was trying to cut out these box top competitors and put together a presentation that looked beautiful. But my work was on his desk. I could see how what a mess it was. It was jagged edges. Because if you've ever tried to cut a piece of paper with one hand, and sometimes when I do presentations in person, I have people try that. It's a mess. I was trying to do
Wow.
the work of a two-handed person using one hand and not looking at the results of the impact of that. And
Mm.
I was definitely in the state of shock that you're in, which was I left his office, I backed out, and I made a decision at that point. I said, Ruth, you can leave this internship now. Like you could literally go to the elevator and leave and take the train out of Grand Central in New York and go home, or you can figure out ways to get it done. Because telling him about my hand didn't feel safe. Like he didn't make that space feel safe to
Mm.
do it. HR didn't know about my hand. My interns didn't, the fellow interns didn't know about my hand. Nobody knew. And it didn't feel safe at that moment to tell anyone. What felt safe was how can I overcompensate? How can I figure this out? And so I started to use huge law books and hold down the pieces of paper. There was a really moldy kind of file room that nobody ever went down to that I could go, and I did work down there. When the fellow interns were going out after work at 5:30 for happy hour, I didn't join them. I stayed back so that nobody would see my hand, because whether it
Oh,
was
wow.
the books or the file room or the staying late, I
Hmm.
just wanted a space where I could get the work done and nobody would find out about my hand.
That is powerful.
Yeah, no, and I tell you, I ended that internship and with the gold stars, but I was exhausted and I was lonely. Like this was not a way I thought of living life in a professional part. Um,
And did
and
you
that
ever share your disability with that person?
no, that mean Mr. Kindergarten guy, I never did.
I
He
mean, Mr. Kindergarten guy.
he did not know, and
Mhm.
it's sad because I have shared that story a number of times with people, and often what people will say is, and we talk about is, what could he have said, right? Because we're often, as managers and leaders, confronted with things that people come in with differences, whether it's they're showing up every day late to work, and we sit there and we're
Mhm.
like, oh, how come you're always late? Or their presentation isn't spell checked, or you know what, they don't get it in on time.
Mhm.
We make a lot of assumptions
We
about
do.
people, right? Rather than sometimes taking a pause and a step back and be like, what's going on? Like,
Right.
what's happening? And because we think we have to figure it out for them, but we never ask or we don't even spend time. So it's how do we create the space? Because all he had to say, I think, is what's going on, Ruth? Like we hired you for a certain role and your work, it just seems different than what I imagined. Or somebody cleverly said to me one time, he could have just started out with hi, like, how are you today? Like slowing down the conversation.
Yeah.
Because again, as
Yeah.
managers and leaders, we have expectations and we have
Mhm.
pressures, et cetera. And yet sometimes we fail to slow down and
Yeah.
ask how they're doing and how we can be supportive, because that's really our job as managers and leaders, is to support our people and set them up for success.
Right.
And I didn't
Well,
always do it
and
either.
Ruth, I look at both sides. As you're telling this story, yeah, I look at him and how he responded, and he had some responsibility in that for
Yeah,
sure, as do our leaders today. As you said, people who are late all the time, people who aren't doing the quality of work, to stop and go,
what's
I
happening?
wonder what's going on versus the blame, 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 blame. And at the same time, I love the yes and approach, and that is you had some responsibility to be
Yep.
transparent and push past that fear and
Yeah.
say, hey, just so you know, here's why.
Yeah.
And so, when you are working with clients to help create this culture of unhiding, where do you start? And does it involve both parties?
Absolutely. No, this is such a brilliant question and point because thank you, Wendi, because
Yeah.
it is a two-way street. Absolutely. And my mantra that I live by and that I also talk about in my book a lot is leaders have to go first
Mm,
because we know that nothing changes without leadership kind of modeling for us and creating that safe space. So you're absolutely right. I had an obligation and an opportunity to talk about it, but it wasn't safe. What would have been safe is to create that space. So then it was my opportunity for him. If he could have shared, hey, I've been challenged with projects too. Here's some of the things that I do to figure things out. Where can I be of help to you? I don't know if in that moment I would have felt safe, but I would have known it was a place to go back to. And
mm,
I think oftentimes employees, when they get the message that it's not safe, they don't come back, right? So how do we as leaders go first in terms of modeling what it's like to say where we felt challenged or, hey, how can we tune in and creating that safe place so that, and then employees, as you're suggesting, need to be back with us, right? It's a two-way
right.
street. How do we create that space? Because it is one thing for leaders to go first and then nobody does anything. No,
Right.
we're not doing it for nothing. We're doing it also to connect and to create space and support.
Yeah.
So yes, it's absolutely a two-way street, 100%.
Okay, so two questions. I want to go back to something that you said about connectedness because I had not made pun intended the connection of unhiding and connectedness until you just shared your story about not going to happy hour.
Mm,
So dig into that a little bit. How does connectedness fit with all of this? Because I'm a huge proponent of community. I believe we were created for community and not just community, connected community. And so I'm so grateful that that's a part of what you do. Tie those two things together for us, unhiding and connectedness.
yep. Unhiding is the key to connection. That I'll say it again. Unhiding is the key to connection. And what I mean by that is when we unhide, we don't just change ourselves, it has ripple effects in terms of how we transform every room we walk into. When we
Mhm.
show up as a person who is safe, who is authentic, and I use authentic in quotes because I think sometimes it gets overused, right?
Agree.
When we show up as our best self, where we can, it's interesting, Wendi, we're taught often that people connect with us because of our strengths, right? Like, oh, we want to see strong people. But the truth is, people connect with us because of our struggles.
Yeah.
They connect with us when they see that we can be human. I
Hmm.
know I was connected to somebody who, on the outside, their life seems so perfect. Like, and I was like, oh, I'm not going to share anything about my life, what's going on. Like, I don't need to know about that. And we were walking together. And at one point I was asking them about the holidays and what they were doing. And they shared with me, well, I have some challenges in my life. And they were sharing some of those challenges. And it was like, I got to exhale because then I could say, gosh, well, okay, that person's not perfect, right? Because perfect feels disconnected. It feels like I'm
Mm.
never going to measure up. I'm judging you based on something that you're trying to appear as, and I'm not going to measure up to that. Well, but when you
Mm.
share parts of what you're going through, it offers me an opportunity to support you, like, and to connect with you. It also offers me an opportunity to share what I'm going through. And I can tell you when those walls started coming down around me in
Mhm.
terms of what I was hiding, and I wasn't making the connection of here I'm hiding and it's keeping me from feeling connected. And I was a
Mhm.
psychology major, I was a social work major, like I have a master's in social work. I thought, of course I'll be able to see this. I couldn't see it.
Mm.
So sometimes it means bringing in some extra reinforcement, some extra support. And that might look like therapy, that might look like journaling. And for me, what it means is just inviting the second step after you've made awareness of what it is you're hiding and how it might be holding you back is inviting in one other person. So, Wendi, when people hear this episode, it's thinking about who that go-to person in their
Mm.
life is, right? That person who is trustworthy, that person who asks really good questions, who's
Mhm.
curious, who's willing to share something about themselves.
Mhm.
The second step is how do we invite someone else in? Because that starts to lower our guard and allow somebody else to kind of unclaim those narratives in our head, but also helps us lower those walls and find connection with others and build community outside because we're not
Mhm.
so alone anymore.
Yeah. Ruth, I did a growth conference for a client that's been a client of mine for 10 years, and this was in October of last year. And we were doing leadership work, and we were talking about emotional intelligence. And I don't know why, I just felt like I was supposed to share some of my adversity and how my adversity had propelled me into some different places that I had not anticipated. And I'm looking at the audience, and there are people in tears. There are people, just like chins dry. And I was so confused.
Mm.
And I had a line of people, and it still makes me emotional to talk about this today. I'd worked for them for 10 years. I had never had a line after like I had at the end of this day. And I could not talk to everybody because we had a gala that night. And, I got emails later of people who said, "Can I please just talk to you? Can I please just?" And one of my conversations was, "Wendy, I have looked at you as if you can do no wrong. I thought the expectation of me is I can do no wrong." And as you started to share, and I shared some really personal things with them, our walls began to break down. And I
Mm-hmm.
guess I hadn't made that connection either of that was connection. I called it authenticity to your point. I think that can be overused. The next step though to that is that connection. And they didn't connect with me on my success stories. They connected with me on my failures and on my adversities.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the key to this whole thing is, again, and I'm so curious, Wendy, when you said before sharing that piece, like you were confused, what do you think what was the confusion about? Like what was coming up as you thought about, oh, I'm confused. Like, why would they be like, what was the, I guess, assumption
Yeah,
that
well,
if you
I think I thought that it would make me relatable.
mm,
And I don't even know. I wasn't intentionally going, okay, I'm going to share my story so that you feel comfortable sharing your story. I felt that I needed to share some adversities, and that wasn't even the topic. I don't even know how we got there. And so I think my aha was, why are they surprised that I'm sharing? Which hindsight 2020, now I don't know if I was hiding. I don't know if I just was showtime. And so, of course, I never talked about my adversities. That was so much more powerful than sharing the successes. So I think that was my surprise was the intensity of the reaction.
yeah, yeah. Well, because it's what we're all craving, right? We're all craving
Yeah.
belonging. We're all craving connection. I mean,
Yeah.
there's, I know the Surgeon General has brought it up and now it definitely has become more talked about is there's a loneliness epidemic. We feel
Yeah.
alone, even surrounded by people, because
Hmm.
sometimes we feel like we can't really be who we are. We can't feel seen and valued for those different perspectives and experiences that we've had. We
Mm.
can't feel heard because we've had to button up or keep closed or hide. And I mean, I put an asterisk next to this because I do think there are certain times that it is safer to hide. And I say that in terms of strategic hiding because it's
Hmm.
about knowing your surroundings. Like
Right.
you felt comfortable sharing that because it was a safe place and you were running it, right? Like you were sharing it.
Right.
Maybe in a negotiation with a competitor or client, you might not share some of those
Probably not.
adversities, right?
Yeah.
Like, so
Hmm.
it's thinking about where are the spaces and how do we create those spaces for people to feel
Hmm.
connected to us? And it really starts with us,
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
Thinking about it.
And as it's appropriate. So Ruth, I'm
Yes.
going to take this somewhere that I hope it's okay. I want to make this real. So I'm a leader and I'm listening to this and I'm going, okay, for the love of God, like I've got a business to run. And I got to be honest, I've had these conversations with leaders, with DEI and now it's my responsibility, diversity, equity, inclusion, and now we've added a B of belonging. Is it my job to make sure that the people coming into their roles in my company belong, or should they have been taught that? And that word makes me crazy, the should word, should they have been taught that? Quit shouldn't on people. Shouldn't they have been taught that? from their parents. And so there is this reality of, yeah, this all is great personally. When it comes into the workspace, we've got a job to do. We've got profits to make. Is it my job as a leader to make sure somebody belong? And like to me, running a company, that feels overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a couple things going on there. One is it's an old model of a framework of what leadership is supposed to be, right? There's this, and
Mm,
like we were talking about before, there's a leadership mentality of you have to have it all together, you have to keep people at arm's length, you can't show vulnerability, like that's what a strong leader looks like. And yet
exactly.
you have a generation coming in that is demanding transparency, that is talking about mental health for the first time in a long
Hmm.
and we add on to DEI, I mean, not just the B, but we add on accessibility to it. So there's an A there. There's justice, we add on that. So it can feel like a lot. And my answer to those leaders is yes, it is your job to go first and your job to handle this. And what that means is it doesn't mean, I guess what it doesn't mean, and then I'll say what it does mean. It doesn't mean trying to tackle it all yourself. What it means is starting to create those spaces for people to feel connected to you. What it means is starting to slow down some of it to create the
Mhm.
pause because at the end of the day, it is about business. They are absolutely right. So I'm going to say this is what it does mean. It is about business. And what we know about business is it's about people. And if your people aren't feeling their best or their most supported or where they can actually be their most innovative and creative, then we've lost. And so what
Mhm.
hiding does is it impacts retention, it impacts engagement, and it impacts innovation. Hiding impacts the bottom line of a business. And the solution, unhiding, does too. Unhiding allows people to feel seen. It allows them to ask for support when they need it. So they feel engaged. They feel better about their workspace. So they're more likely to stay in terms of retention. It even with leaders who unhide feel better about the workspace they're at and they feel like they can actually be a leader.
Mm.
What's been amazing is there was just a report out of Randstad that talked about the idea of Gen Z. Almost 70% of Gen Z feel like they need to hide part of themselves. And the interesting caveat to this, or piece on top of it, Wendi, was they don't feel like their leaders will do anything about it. And so, as
Mm.
I say to leaders, yes, it is your job. And the other piece to this puzzle is when our people and our leaders feel at their best and feel like they can be seen and feel like they belong, they're more innovative and creative. This isn't new news. It's not like something, oh, who thought of this? People
Right.
have been saying this for a long time. I mean, I think about a 2014 piece in Bloomberg magazine with Tim Cook, who said, we know that when we allow people to bring their differences to work, companies do better. It's not
Yeah.
that hard. But as leaders, how do we create the space and how do we start to do the work first on ourselves and
Hmm.
then start to model that for our executive teams and then for our employees? And that's the work I do too, is I spend time working with leaders one-on-one and then also with employees so that it is because it's a two-way street to your point, because
Yeah.
leaders can't go first and be out there to dry, hang to dry.
Hmm.
It requires employees being open to do it too.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate that this world is changing and that you acknowledge the evolution of leadership because
Mhm.
it truly, it is changing.
Yeah.
And, if we don't change, we die. And I would say, there's so many studies right now about employees who say trust is important, vulnerability is important, ultimately, leadership is important. And yet, a very small percentage of those same employees are saying, I actually get that at my workplace. So we aren't on average painting I don't want to paint everything with the same brush. And yet, at the same time, the statistics show that there is big opportunity for us to lead better. And to your point, it it maybe the actual goal is not profitability or revenue or retention. Those things are results of doing the work here and becoming a better leader and therefore building a better culture.
100%. 100%. And it's it's funny, Wendi. I had a leader speak to me after one of my sessions that I was coaching. And he said, he started out saying, you know what, during COVID and past COVID, I've had my camera off and my microphone muted. And when we dug into that a little bit, he said, well, I have a child with serious mental health challenges at home, and I don't want anyone to know. And he's like, not only do I not want them to know because it's not my story to tell, he said, but I don't want to be seen as a bad father. I don't want to be seen
Mm.
as a bad leader. Because sometimes when those emotional outbursts happen, I have to deal with them. And I don't want anyone to know that. And we talked about it. And I'm like, so what's your team saying about you when you have your camera off and your microphone muted, not knowing that piece of your life?
Such a great
And
question.
they think I'm cold. They think I'm disconnected. They think, yeah, okay. So who can you tell? Like, how
What's
can we,
worse?
right, which worse? And how can we start the conversation? And what we determined was being able to go to one of the employee resource groups within his company and start to listen first about how people were talking about similar challenges, and then starting to have those conversations. And he came back, he's like, Ruth, I went to that, and somebody else has that same exact thing that they're dealing with. And I was able to share it, my story. And he said, and then I started to share parts of it out with my team, the appropriate parts. Because again, it's about thinking about, it's not having people save you, right? Like that's not why we share
Right.
about hiding. We
Right.
don't need to have our teams carry our stuff for us, but they need to understand us so that when our cameras are off or our microphones are muted, they're not making assumptions or starting rumor mills about why.
Mhm.
Um, because that's can feel really isolating and toxic for workplace cultures also.
Yeah.
So, you know, truth is, Wendi, everyone's hiding something. And yet,
Mhm.
when I ask people to think about what it is they're hiding, all of a sudden it's somebody else's hiding. But the truth is, it's about looking at ourselves and thinking about what is it? What's the story I'm telling myself? And if it's
Right.
not me and everybody else is hiding, maybe I can have a look at what others might be hiding and how I can support them, how I can create that space.
Yeah. Well, and I love that it creates that connection, it creates community. The other thing I'm thinking about as I'm listening to you, Ruth, is one of as leadership continues to evolve, personal leadership and professional leadership, I keep hearing about empathy. I had somebody on my show a couple of weeks ago, Maria Ross, and she does empathy for a living, meaning with leaders, with individuals, with sales teams. She's incorporated empathy into her sales training. And that's what I'm thinking about as you're giving these examples. I now know someone else who has a similar issues. I can stand in their shoes. And being an empathetic leader is one of those characteristics that as leadership continues to evolve, it's it's crucial. It's not just a characteristic that's important. It's crucial to that inspiration and followership. So are you seeing that as well as an outcome as people start to unhide?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny that you bring up Maria's work because I think it's kind of before we got on this call today, Wendi, we talked about people getting promoted, right? And we people get promoted because they're really good at that job. So they get promoted
Mhm.
into becoming managers or becoming leaders because they're really good at a beginning job. And then how do they get promoted? And sometimes what's missing from that ingredient pool is that training around empathy building, that training
Mhm.
around unhidden leadership, I call it. How do we create those spaces so that leaders can be ready to take on everything that's required today to be a really great leader?
Mhm.
Some of it doesn't come naturally in terms
Yeah.
of we're expecting people to have certain skills when we haven't actually talked about them or rewarded them in terms of leadership.
Mm. So powerful and so interesting. I would just want to talk to you about this forever because I think there's so many different paths that this can take us. And when I look at some of the outcomes, and I'm passionate about the outcomes. The show is called Unleashed, and so we're unleashing outcomes. And I think it's by changing how we think about things and mindset, which then changes our behavior. Which as our belief systems start to change, all of that starts to be unleashed, and the outcome is just the measurement. So, as you do this work, what are some of the outcomes that you've experienced as people start to unhide?
Yeah, that's a good question. if I think about, I always like to think of in threes. So I think what immediately comes to mind, I have two of them. I'll think of a third by the time we finish. I think the first is, I think there's you get back yourself a little bit. So there's a relaxation around yourself when people unhide to themselves, because that's the first place to start is you unhide to yourself. You figure out what it is that you're hiding and what would it mean to unhide it? What would that look like? How would that feel safe? What kind of freedom comes with it? So there's this relaxation. It's that exhale that people get when they unhide. And what starts to manifest after that is they start to build connections so that they start to feel more connected to the workspaces they're in, to their partners, to their friends, to pretty much everybody in their life, because they start to let down some walls and allow some people in to either support them or to understand them. So that's a second piece to this. And I guess the third piece that I would stress is they start to share out their story so that they start to help somebody else start their journey of unhiding. Because unhiding is made up of 4 steps. It's acknowledging it, it's inviting someone in, it's building community, and then it's sharing your story out so that you can help somebody else on their journey. So that we're really creating what I've seen it do in companies is it starts to create a space where people feel engaged, where they want to stay, where they feel heard, where they feel like they belong. And some of the best companies that I've worked with also create innovation. And that's an outcome that I think we all want, is we want this world to feel better.
It's so true that innovation requires creativity. If my mind is, if I have the weight of what I'm hiding,
Oh,
I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist. I would think that there would be a direct connection between that and my creativity. And so
yes.
you're right, in this world of innovation, could it start with unhiding?
It has to, because otherwise, and I mean, I know I'm preaching from one side of this, but the reason I share my story isn't because I want to talk about what it was like for me. I invite you to be curious about your own journey, because that opens up so many channels. And
Mm,
absolutely, creativity and innovation is a huge piece. When you're stuck thinking about someone's going to find out this thing about me that I'm
yeah.
hiding, someone's going to be, judge me or reject me or pity me, then we don't create spaces for that innovation. We also don't create spaces to just exhale and breathe.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
it is exhausting and it's lonely.
It is exhausting. And, Ruth, I appreciate the work that you're doing, teaching people how to unhide. And that must be so rewarding to you, especially given the 25 years that you were in hiding. So I'm curious what your legacy is. When people see your name, Ruth Rathblott, what's the legacy? What do you want them to equate with Ruth Rathblott?
It's a word you've said several times and we've both said several times. It's the idea, and the word is connection.
Mhm.
How do we build connection? Because that's really why we were put on this earth. I mean, we know, as you said, there are scientific studies, there's biology, there's history. That connection is one of the crucial parts of our life. And Wendi, if I can shorten that time that anyone in your audience feels like they have to hide a part of themselves, if I can shorten that time for someone by going through these 4 steps, and it's not overnight, it's not a flip of a switch, not just listening to this podcast won't do it in terms of, oh, all of a sudden I'm going to start on hiding everywhere. That doesn't feel safe. That's not what I'm recommending.
Mhm.
However, if I can shorten that time for people so that they can be their best self, that they can truly live their potential and discover their potential, that's the goal. I think about that 13-year-old who got on that yellow school bus that day and
Mhm.
started hiding. If I could have shortened her time so that it wasn't so exhausting and so it wasn't so lonely, so that there was freedom and joy, and I got back to living my life when I stopped
Yeah.
hiding. That's what I want for other people. I want them to feel connected to their own lives and to others.
So, for those listeners who are really connecting with this and desire this and are going, okay, I can relate to the fight or flight too, the fear of your amygdala going, what are you doing? Stop. Where do they start? What do they do? I always want to leave our listeners with some kind of an action that they can do today. Where do they start?
Yeah. think about what it is that you're hiding. Answer that question for yourself and write it down on a piece of paper. Even if you tear it up and burn it after, I found that, Wendi, once you write something down, you can't unsee it. Your brain can't unsee it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a choice then what you can do with it, whether you work on it or whether you push it back under a carpet or put it to the side because you're not ready at this time to really think about it. But once you write down what it is you're hiding, what's holding you back from connecting, what's holding you back from thriving, what's holding you back from being your best self, once you write that down, you have a chance and an opportunity to start to work on it. And that's the first step. And it's such a powerful first step that I encourage every listener to think about, where is it that you're hiding in your life? What is it that you're hiding?
I love that you encourage us to write it down. And there are so many studies. You're exactly right. If it's written, it's real. That's become my mantra. And I don't think that will ever change. I think that's just when we see it, it's real. Write it down. They say to write down, whoever they is, write down our goals, write down where you're hiding. And that is such a launching point. I'm not going to say easy because I don't think it's going to be easy. I think it's going to take some time and I love that you say, get a friend.
And then invite someone in, someone that you
Yeah.
trust, to share and say, hey, I listened to Wendi on her Unleashed podcast, and she had this guest, Ruth, talk about that she hid for 25 years, that most of us are hiding something, and that when we unhide, we find freedom and joy. And check out some of the work I do. I mean, I think that's the space also is watch the TEDx that you talked about at the beginning. Read the books, Singlehandedly and Unhide and Seek, because there are messages and cues in there on how, and reflection questions on how to start this journey, because it doesn't have to be so painful and so lonely.
So good. Ruth, thank you so much for being on Unleashed. And we will make sure that all of your information, including your books, all of the information will be in the show notes. And so I just want to thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for your willingness to unhide and to model that and not just stop there. Use your experiences to help individuals, leaders, companies create this culture, because I think it's just a crucial place that we get to go to. I'm not going to say have to. We get to go there, and I think it is a choice. So I just want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendi, and thanks for making this possible to amplify this message. I really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing parts of yourself too.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Well, I would say buy Ruth's books. She certainly has a story to tell, and choose to impact yourself, companies, and others around you today. So to our Unleashed listeners, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to Unleashed with Wendi Swanson. Make sure to subscribe and follow to be notified when the newest episodes of the podcast go live. Please take a moment to rate and review us. It helps others discover Unleashed and join our movement of forward-thinking leaders. You can find contact information and important links in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode, and remember, keep leading with authenticity, embrace change, and choose to live life unleashed.